I'm usually very nervous about these things because, public speaking is a very difficult thing. So one of the tricks that I've learned over the years is like I acknowledge my fears up front. So I'll start with everything that I do is I am very nervous about this, and it kind of disarms all of you. So there you go. I already see smiles, so I think I'm doing this right. And I'm also a very visual person. I try to balance things with seriousness and a little bit of lighthearted fun along the way. So if I drop a couple of dad jokes or memes here and there, I hope you guys enjoy it. But I think why we're all here is in our day-to-day jobs or maybe just what we do. I think there's a lot of bridge building that we potentially do between technical and non-technical teams. And it turns out it's a lot harder than you would expect it to be. So I'm hoping within the next 10 minutes, I can tell you how I've been managing bridging these divides. But I think probably, beyond just the introductions, uh, why should you even listen to me? Who am I? Like, do I even talk about things? Oh, and my toddler just walked in. So, I'm having my BBC moment as well. So, there's a lot of things that are probably is on your mind. But before I begin, I think it's good to establish. Okay, Mrs. Thank you. It's okay to establish sort of my credentials. Manan said, I've been around for a while. And in my role, I have plenty of opportunities to work on complicated things, both in my youth and in my later years. But I think most recently at Humane, there's been a number of challenges where I've had to deal with a plethora of technical and non-technical teams. At Humane, I launched a direct-to-consumer store. I launched a carrier, did a cloud migration, and this all happened within a year. So, it's the startup life. So after establishing my credentials, I think when we think about cross-functional collaboration, and I don't mean just technical versus non-technical, there's an expectation or reality we have of how that goes. And I think a lot of us hope that it's like a campfire where we all sit together and talk about what our hopes and dreams are. Biz dev comes with a request of like, we have this feature request, and engineering breaks into a song and says, three sprints, and we'll be done. And we all have marshmallows afterwards, and QA is like, this is the best thing that's been ever been shipped. And sales comes along and says, we have triple X star sales, right? But the reality is, it's more like Tower of Babel. And the reason why is I think we're all operating on different dimensions, different places, different experiences, and different objectives altogether. And I think as leaders, one of our first instincts is to go after the process, right? We don't have enough process. The process is broken. We don't want to spend time to actually dig deeper, come together. And I don't mean just like a regular old retrospective. A lot of our problems that we face when we're talking about building bridges or working with cross-functional collaborations, it's a very human problem. And when it's a human problem, it's harder to address because what you're talking about is the different languages we speak, right? And I don't mean like programming languages and things like that, right? Think about something as simple as, hey, I want to deliver something. Thanks, buddy. I want to deliver a feature. Does it end up in dev? Does it end up in staging? Biz dev is not going to know anything about that. They just want to know when I get this feature so I can start selling it to my customers, right? So there's a lot of lexicons or missing links. And I mentioned different dimensions that everybody's sort of operating on. So what I have found that the best way to address this sort of bridge or divide is you need a lingua franca. For anybody that does not know this, this is a Latin, I hope it's a Latin phrase. In the ancient world, commercial trade between new nations required some sort of a language. For the ancient times, Latin was the lingua franca. And for most of our pre-modern times, French was the lingua franca. But I don't anticipate that there will be a historical quiz afterwards about different, empires and things like that. What I want you to walk away with is the concept of a translation layer. And what I have learned is that the best way to bridge this device or this common lingua franca is always translating or talking things across these three different planes. And the fourth one is a bonus one: time, money, outcomes, and impact. And who doesn't love a triangle? And just to make things even awesome, I put a circle in there, just to make it awesome. It's a triangle and a circle, so can't beat me at that. I have now got the, what is it, the conjoined triangles of success, Silicon Valley fans. But what does this look like in practice? And this is something that, I actually had ChatGPT help me build this thing out. But you can imagine a real world example could something look at something as basic as this. Business development comes along and says, hey, we want to add a feature to the product. And you can imagine everything that biz dev wants is a client really wants it. They're a big account. And I imagine all of you folks come from SaaS. So this biz dev could not be a client. It could be like the data tells us that we need this feature, or our user analytics tell us, or user research tells us this, we need this. And in a world without this common lexicon, engineers would go off and be like, okay, refactoring of the code base, 3 sprints. We'll have to look at the architecture, APIs, regression testing, CI/CD, a whole bunch of things. And BD is just going to be like, huh? What? I didn't ask you to run a sprint. I just want I'm exaggerating, of course, but it's very common where it happens that engineering is speaking a different language versus what business development is trying to get at. So what feels like is an environment where everybody is under pressure, underappreciated, you get frustration, and you all walk away with misalignment. Like BD's like, okay, he said he will do all of these things, or she said they'll do all of these things. Clearly, they're committing to doing these things. When at no point a time was mentioned, no point an impact was mentioned, outcome, the engineer just rattled off a whole bunch of things that they would have to do, right? But when you put that triangle, when you put that framework on, suddenly it completely shifts the entire conversation, right? You start talking about time. Let's break it down, right? It's going to take 6 weeks, which is roughly 3 sprints. Money, you're talking about resources, manpower, you're talking about other features on the roadmap that you need to negotiate on. You're talking about impact versus what we're focused on and what we should be focusing on. And what you start to notice is a very productive conversation about trade-offs, because at the end of the day, everything that we do from a product development perspective is always what can we afford not to focus on. It's never about what we focus on, but it's always about what we can choose to safely not focus on. And then what you notice is that there's a shared understanding. If there is an impasse, you have all the necessary information to go back to your leadership team and have an honest conversation about what is the right priority. And that priority is now enveloped in this conversation around impact, because that's what matters at the end of the day of like, why are we doing something? It's for impact, better adoption, better retention, and things like that. And it's absent any technical jargon, yet everybody gets an understanding of what it is that we're trying to do. I'm sure you have all been doing this for a very long time, and you know this, that it's pretty basic. Like that's how all cross-functional collaboration should be, right? We come to you, you take a moment and take the time to unpack what we've asked you, ask why we're doing this, what are the KPIs, what are the things that we want to do, how much time it's going to take, money, resourcing. After having spent time in big tech and then having spent time trying to scale up a startup, it turns out, I think, in my opinion, that's a very unfair assumption, because the learning curves across both of those areas is very different. Technology, tech employees, like engineers, spend a long time working on their craft, understanding how to develop modular architectures and building things that are performant and scaling and reliable and secure. But on the opposite side, your business and non-technical folks spend an entire lifetime crafting the art of sales, crafting the art of understanding what your customers want. To suddenly ask everybody to just day one have this common language or understanding is a super huge unfair assumption for any of us to have as leaders, or anybody who's involved in sort of building bridges, whether you're a product manager or a technical program manager. And is that a bad thing? No, I think that's part of growth and professional development. But the biggest thing is that a lot of these folks who are really great at building these bridges, they've learned through experience, they've made mistakes. They've had that first conversation and gone back and thought, why did that conversation feel so bad? How could I have made it more productive? Or what could I have done differently? And over time, mistakes help you develop your own sort of model of what works. Maybe you find in your engineering organization, time and impact is more important, right? I think big tech, time and impact is more important, right? How long it's going to take, what's the impact, right? You're not worried about money if you're Apple and you've got trillions of dollars in your bank account and your economy's like your balance sheet is bigger than most economies. But when you're a startup, it's all about time and money, right? Maybe you're in the early stages and outcome is not super important. You're trying to ship things as quickly as you possibly can. So never assume this. And I think part of any professional development program that helps leaders develop this, it's to find the common language that helps the technical and non-technical teams work together. It's pretty straightforward. Manan said lightning talk. I lightning through it. So hopefully you found this and you're very impressed with me and you have a lot of great questions for me.
I'm still going around circles, you know, with the triangle. Like, I let Thanos ask the first question. I know he can snap
I'll
his
make an
finger.
observation though, because you know, you presented the before and after, and I think that was really good. But the thing that I see most of the time is the engineer will even say something worse, which is like, well, we could hack our way into this and do it in 3 weeks by generating a bunch of technical debt. And now you're having the BD person make a technical choice they're clearly not supposed to make, and that the engineer should have never even presented in the first place. And we go down even a worse rat hole. So
That's
I was impressed that we at least picked reasonable choices forward with this.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, that's another thing. It turns out that speaking that language of non-technical for technical people, it's very difficult. And I think a lot of that has to do with personality, right? If you have an engineer who is either very conservative or very methodical or has a very sort of not slow approach, but a holistic approach, right? They would never make that statement. They will always be the right way to ship this thing is 3 sprints. But if you have an engineer who's either junior or is has a personality that likes to make sure business development is very happy because they want something in the future, they'll be like, look, I know it's 3 sprints. I can get it to you in this way if you let me do it this way, right? And you're right, it's putting the pressure on the biz dev folks. And I think this is where part of that impact or that time conversation, we help engineers understand that hacky ways or quick shortcuts should always be last resort. You should never start off the conversation with this approach. And it's part of that, again, professional development where you help your engineers try to understand what's the right way to speak about committing to a scope and whatnot. Only under pressure, honestly, you should be thinking about what's the quickest shortcut that we can take if it's like a do or die situation. I think your statement would work really well in a startup environment where you're short on runways, where you are trying to meet a big client that can potentially extend your runway or have a huge revenue impact, right? You worry about the refactoring of that shortcut later. But I don't think there's any excuse to ever have that conversation be the first thing you do when you're at a big tech or when you're revenue positive and you're not under the pressure and what you're trying to do is increase adoption or retention. It's a very astute observation. And my solution has always been to figure out how to tell them not to start. Or the worst part is imagine if an engineer is not in the room and the TPM is there and they're like, yeah, we can totally do it in 3 sprints. And it's my cardinal rule that a TPM or a PM should never commit to scope on behalf of engineering. Never, ever. It should always be, I will go back and have a conversation and let you know within 24 hours.
Aadil, may I request that you stop sharing screen?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. And so who'd like to go with the next question? Stuart?
Sure, I have a question. In the startup world, where you're building a product, how do you balance to the non-technical people that you want to build it in such a way that it's scalable, that it's going to be secure, and such that when you want to add additional features, it's easier down the line, but you have to make that upfront architecture decision and input of resources versus just sort of an MVP that you might have to completely redo.
Yeah. Oh man, this is bringing back memories. So when I first joined Humane, one of the conversations that we were having was that, we want to do something different. At Apple, at Nike, at Google, we always felt like we were under the pressure of trying to do something. Sorry, give me 1 second. Sorry about that. We were always under the pressure of trying to build something very quick, very fast. I think the way we framed it was, if you want acceleration in the future when we get past 1.0, you need to let us do this right. Because if we don't do it now, yes, you will get to the starting line fast, but then we're going to spend the next 3 years barely making any progress because we've built a house of cards which is standing on very shaky foundation. And it turns out that, business development folks or non-technical folks, like, everybody's very reasonable individuals, unless they're not, right? Unless they're not reasonable, then I don't have any process or solutions that can help you get past that kind of like, blockheadedness. But this is the way you explain it. It's like, you can either get to a certain point fast, or you can win the marathon, which is what we're trying to win, right? What do you want to do? Do you want to run a sprint right now and then get exhausted when we start running the marathon? Or do you want to run the marathon now? And it's all about the mantra we used to have at Apple was go slow to go fast, right? Go slow now, be methodical with your approach, both system architecture, both system design, both scaling your organization, right? Stripe is very famous for saying that, the first 20 or 30 hires you do should be the slowest hires you do. Same thing goes for the first version of your architecture should be methodically thought out. But I think there's also a balance of not chasing perfection, right? There was this quote from Steve Jobs that hangs in Infinite Loop 4, where it's basically summarized as, when you've built something that's good enough, just move on. And I think many startups will get stuck in building that perfect thing. There's no such thing as that perfect architecture, because it's perfect in that moment until you start building on top. So to summarize, the way to do it is like, we're going to go slow so we can go fast later. And this is the way that we will get acceleration later on.
Yeah, I think, in my experience, the challenge in educating non-technical people is that balance between time, money, and
Yeah.
Impact. I think, you can, or not even impact, but, even quality, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I find, they have trouble. I say you can have two out of the three, right? In terms of quality, right?
Yeah.
And cost. And so I think they have trouble, balancing that sometimes when, they have a pending feature they want right away, right? And then communicating to them that, it might be buggy. And, and then and then what happens is, you as the TPM come away with all the incoming fire from, like, this is buggy and this is not working. When you even though you communicated up front that this is the trade-off you're going to have. How do you balance that with communicating with them and sort of preventing the backlash that's inevitable if they choose time and money over,
Yeah. So, there's a cynical answer to this, and there's sort of an optimistic answer for this. The cynical answer is, you kind of at some point say, fine, we'll do what you want. And then when things break and things are buggy, I will come to you and tell you, in the next time we make this negotiation, remember that time when I told you this is what's going to happen, right? It's a very fatal double-edged approach that you can sort of take, because I think at some point they can exert a force that's much, much higher than you, right? They can bring down the executive decision hammer, unless you are the CEO and then you can make the decisions and all that stuff. But at some point you will lose. And I think that's okay. What you can plan for is contingencies. And I think the optimistic way of thinking about it is like, fine, we'll still do this. But I'm going to build mechanisms in place, like server-side feature flags or mechanisms to turn this feature off and on, right? That goes back to building solid, slow down and think about the whole thing before you start launching things willy-nilly, right? You want to have big giant buttons that you can turn off, right? So the right way to do this is like, fine, we'll do this, but I need you to give me this extra bit of time so I can build all of these buttons and nuclear options in place so that when this happens, which I can predict will happen, we'll turn this off. Now, I need you to be ready and prepare for managing the PR disaster that's going to be, right? Your job is to build it. Their job is to sell it. And part of that selling should be, if things break, how do we message it to the customer, right? It's more of that risk up front. So, one other way to do this is like a quick spike, right? Linear does this a really great way. I don't know if you guys know about Linear. Linear is like the Jira competitor. You guys should all go check it out. And I think the way these guys do product development is super fantastic, where when they build something, they launch it with a core set of beta groups or key clients where they enable this feature just for those clients. And that becomes sort of like a real life proof without risking your entire production cohort or your production user base with something that's like super buggy or not. And that gives you sort of that canary in the coal mine early signal that, okay, this is clearly not ready. And what's beneficial with this approach is that now you have the data to back it up and tell them like, look, this is not me saying it. This is our top tier clients who are beta testing this feature for us saying that this is, what it is. Now, nothing prevents them from saying, hey, we just want to plant a flag, so shift the feature as a beta, just put a label on it and say it's beta. Well, everybody does it. But hopefully they see that there is this data, they see the bugs, they see how much time you need to solve those bugs. You can involve them in the process of saying, now tell me which bugs do you think we should really prioritize, right? Make them part of the process. So, that's the one approach. Like the cynical way is ship it and see, let it fall flat on its face, and then you can turn around. And honestly, most of the time who am I kidding? We don't have the luxury of saying, I told you so. It's like, okay, we're gonna go fix this now, right? And then you're digging yourself out of a hole that you said you dug for yourself, saying, I'll tell you when I'm in the hole, right? Anyways,
I
but
need to
the
dig
right way to
myself out of a hole too. Just sorry, I thought you were done.
no,
I
but
lost the last picture, so before you leave, I need to take another one.
But the right way to do this is like you build the mechanisms in place to turn this feature off if it starts to break down. And it goes back to what I said earlier, go slow to go fast. Or you launch it as an alpha or beta or have a robust internal testing program where you're testing all of these things to find the key major bugs, right? If you're shipping things without any sort of testing ahead of time to find the big bugs, then I think there's a problem with your development process that you should really dig deep and think a lot about.
Great. I have more questions, but I'll let others go right now.
But I'll get the thumbs ups again from Aadil and get this picture done, right? So 3, 2, and thank you. This time I've saved it.
Good.
Aadil, you had a hard stop at
11, yeah, unfortunately. But you all saw my email address. I'll share my contact information with Manan and Saima, so you all can reach out and continue the conversation. But we've got a couple of more minutes. Let me see if I can take one more question.
Great. And he's got a, you want to mention your blog address too? Because I think we can continue there too. But,
Yeah,
sorry,
I'll
ahead,
drop
Steve.
all this information in the chat so that everybody has
Thanks.
it.
Thanks.
Your blog information is there in the invite. So just FYI.
Okay, great.
Yeah, fair warning, I haven't written in over a year, mostly because I've sort of hit a writer's block and I decided to...
We'll help you get over the writer's block.
No, it's like these questions, like I've
they're
taken...
fruitful.
Exactly. I think each one of these questions is like a blog. So, I'm kind of excited about this.
Okay, great. I did want to offer Nathan, if you have a question for one last minute, else we're back to Stuart.
You actually, Stuart covered the 2 questions that I had. So you read the mind,
I love it when that happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, then I have another quick one.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, so, let's say the BD comes to you and he wants a feature, and the impact is going to be, we have to move, other things around on the current roadmap, right? And you're getting conflicting requests from, say marketing or data or, features or whatever. And how do you just go up to your CEO and have him balance out all that stuff? Or, I mean, maybe you could give some insight on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we used to have a rule at Apple that we never walked up to the execs with options. We always walked up there with an opinion of what we wanted to do and had them react to it. And I think I've found that whenever I have walked up and throughout my career to the executives with multiple options and have asked them to pick, they've kind of struggled with it because they get stuck in the same rat hole that we are all in. So I think the happy path is where you work through all that conflict together with all the teams and have an opinion on what we think is the right approach. You can have all the options and you can have all the pros and cons for each of these options, but you should always walk into the room with the executives with an option or a path that we all believe is the right one to go, right? In the rare scenario, I think the right way to do it is, yeah, you get a tiebreaker with the CEO or the executive leadership and say, look, here's the problem. Here are the options. Here's the positive and negative for each one of those things, including like, what's the impact? Like I keep coming back to impact. And I think somebody mentioned, like Thanos mentioned, like, quality or negotiating quality. I think impact is part of that. Time is part of that, right? Time to spend on development and regression testing and things like that. That's all part of the time equation, right? That's all time at the end of the day that you're spending building this feature. So you have to go to a tiebreaker. And what you want to do is, if you have a personal opinion, you can be like, influence as much as possible behind the scenes, maybe go get a one-on-one with senior leadership and prepare your, executive leadership with like, this is the right path to go to and things like that. And ultimately, you kind of have to trust the leadership to make the right call. That's like the worst case scenario, right? And it might very much possible be that you all are still at an impasse. And I think the power that you have as a bridge builder is you can stand up and in the room and say, guys, we have to make a decision. Folks, we have to make a decision. And I feel this is the path that we should go on. Let's focus on what happens if we take this path. Let's play it all out. What happens? Does this feel right to us? How far? Like, what's the standard deviation of what we want to do and how far it's getting us, right? You can get super mathematical with this. But again, the best way is, yeah, you take it to higher powers. But the executive review or whatever you're trying to do, a product review should always be about, we had 3 options and we think this is the best one. And in the very rare scenario, if you all are still at an impasse, then you take all 3 options and say, like, look, we're split, we're divided. We need you to make an executive call. And I think the most powerful thing you can do is you can't be like, be upfront before you start the meeting, before you start the executive review, be very clear about what you want the executives to do. And it's make a decision on which path to go forward on. Most people don't do that. Most people don't do that. What they do is they just walk in and say, like, we're going to have a conversation.
Great. Thank you so much.
I think that's what the circle can stand for. You're going to make a decision.
Yeah, and look, it's like, it's difficult, right? I'm talking about hypotheticals. I'm talking about, possible situations. This is where I tell everything that product development is also a very human endeavor. So what you're trying to navigate is very human personalities. And oftentimes you cannot expect everybody to be rational, because that's what we're hoping everybody is. They're rational. And you're not always going to get it, right? You just have to prepare and plan for it. And part of that goes back to, we're going to go slow, go fast, build contingencies, have a common language to talk about. And I think when you root everything in terms of impact, whether it's OKRs, KPIs, business objectives, bottom line, revenue, resource planning, money spent, it completely changes the conversation and it makes it far more effective.